Okay, Excel friends. So on problem number 3, we're working with Microsoft Stock Analysis. You've got a worksheet that you should have downloaded here, which has got Microsoft information through 2017 for each day where there is trading. And again, remember, it doesn't trade on holidays or Saturdays or Sundays. We've got a closing price, we've got the volume, we've got the opening price, we've got the high and the low, which aren't necessarily the open or the close that happen during the course of the day. So we're going to use these columns in order to come up with some of these other values that are asked here. And instead of using, the exact letters here, I just put them right next door so that they were closer. But you can see A through H here goes through and it identifies the different solutions that we're supposed to have. So the first one is the highest low price. So what we can do here is, all right, well, let's take a look at lows. One of the things that I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold down Shift, Command, and then down arrow to select all of this. And I'm just going to take this range here, and I'm actually going to call it low. So if I just type in, or actually, I think I'll call it plural, lows in here. So that's my range of lows. And so what I can do right in here, once that I've got my lows, is I can just say, hey, if you want to find the largest value in here, how do you do that? The question specifically says don't go through and do the tables and stuff. But what we can do is, remember, we've got our friend the max function in here. And if we just type in lows, again, I can tab over here, press enter, and we get a dollar value here, which is the specific value that we had. In fact, it looks like it's a bit different than the value that's shown. So I'm just going to click on the dollar sign and change it. So it's 84.08. So, all right, great. What about the lowest high price? Well, if we go over here and we do the same kind of thing. So I clicked in cell G4. I hold down Shift and down arrow. I'm going to name my range first. You don't have to name your range, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. And I'm going to call this one highs, plural. And then over here, I'm just going to say equals, and instead of max, I'm going to say equals min. So there we go, min. I'll tab over, I'll type in highs. As soon as I start to type in HIG, notice down here it comes up and says, oh yeah, I think that you want this. I'll press enter, and sure enough, it's 35.88 is the lowest high price that we had during that period of time. The next one is asking for the average close price. So I can go over here, and just to show you, you don't necessarily need to name everything. I could just say equals, and remember, you've got to know for the test, okay, how do I find out the average? Is that mean, or nope, it's just average. So you just type in average over here. And then if I click in, it's going to be the average close price. So I can click in that first cell here, D4. I can hold down Shift and Command and press down. Shift Command down arrow, that is, but there's no reason why not, just to show you. So I just escaped out of that. If I did back equal average in here, tabbed over, you can, of course, again, what are we doing? We're getting the average close price. You could just go ahead and select the range, or just type the range in as well if you know what the range is. But I'm just gonna, you can go ahead and just scroll straight down here if you want to go ahead and do that, or go to the end, all the way to the end. There's quite a few in here, which is one of the reasons why the keyboard shortcut works better for you. That's so I'm going to go ahead and use the keyboard shortcut anyway. But you could select this if you'd like, and here we go. I got D4 to D929. I can just press enter in here. Instead of naming that range, we use the regular value in here, and I'm just going to format that again by clicking on the accounting value here. And answer D is the number of days that the stock is open below the average open price for the entire period, so meaning all of the stocks that we've got. So let's go over here. And since we're going to take a look at the open price, why don't we go ahead and name this range? So again, I'm going to click in F4, Shift Option down, or it could be Shift Control down, and I'm going to put this as open underscore price. And let's see, what would the average be? So we'll say equal average, tab over, then type open, and then we can see open price shows up, and I tab over here and press enter. So this is what my average price is going to be, but we want to calculate the number of days. Now, what's tricky about this is we want to calculate the number of days where it's below an average open price. Now, you had this in your reading, so you've seen this before. What we're going to be using here is count if, and I've put together a slide just to remind you of some of the stuff in the count if, and there's some tricky criteria with this. So count if counts the number of cells in a range where a criteria is true. So the range is just what are the group of cells. So here let's imagine, I've got these 5 people here and I want to work on their grade. So the range would be B2 through B7. And the criteria is just something that's going to be evaluating for true or false. And if it's true, we're just going to increase the count by 1. So we start at 0, and if the value is true, we increase it by 1. So for example, what we have here is, this is the tricky thing here. If the criteria is numeric, then, or if it's a function, then there's no need for double quotes. So look what we have here. So we're essentially saying here, go through these values here, their grades, and if the value equals 70, then count them up. Well, we have 1 and 2 values where the value equals 70, so that's why we have a 2 over here. And again, the value is numeric, so we don't need to put a parentheses around them. Also down here, we see this one is it's a formula, and for a formula we don't need to put quotes around it either. So look through all of them and see if it's the value is the max. Well, who got the max? The max is a 98, and Jean-Luc and Benjamin both got a 98 there, so that's why we have a 2 value here, and it doesn't have to be in quotes. Now this mentions if part of the criteria is not a number, then enclose it in double quotes. So that's why we've got, again, here's our range here, and we can say quote equal 87 and close quote. So we're saying essentially how many are above 87, 1 and 2 right here. So that's why we show up with a 2. Now if we want to go ahead and find out how many are above the average, this is where we've got non-numeric criteria followed by a formula. So we've got to use an ampersand in between. So we say, okay, here's our non-numeric criteria, which is greater than, but then we've got to say ampersand and then our formula value afterward. So that's just where it gets a little bit tricky in here. So you might want to really, retype this spreadsheet or work through it, make sure that you understand some of the criteria, maybe even go through some of the things that were listed in your GIPS book as you prepare here. But now that we have this down, let's go ahead and figure out what we want to do. Well, we want to get an average, and in fact we want to find out the values that are below an average. So instead of doing greater than, we're going to do less than, but because we've got this mixed criteria here where we've got a formula afterward, we're going to do as our criteria quote less than close quote, and then it's going to be ampersand and then our average. So let's pop over here. And we're going to say, so we've got our average function in here. What we're going to do is, again, it's going to be if count. So we'll do, or count if, I should say. So count if, and then what are we going to do? We're going to take a look through a range, and our range is going to be open price. Let's just give myself a little bit of space in here. So again, range is open price, and then our criteria is going to be comma, and what I'm going to do in here is it's going to be, well, we want to make sure that we do an average open price in here. So I'll start to type in average. And then inside the parentheses for that, I want to have open price in there. Now, this is a formula. So again, if we remember what we need to do, if we're going to say less than is non-numeric and it's not a formula, so we got to put it into quotes. And if we had a number in here, if we wanted to say like less than 90, we could go ahead and just straight up put that in there. But if we have a formula afterward, we got to do an ampersand afterward. So if we want to say less than a formula, less than is in quotes, then ampersand and then our price. We press enter over here. We see 562 are the number of days when we opened below what the average price was for the entire period. Now E wants us to go over and find the date on which the stock closed with the highest price. So we can build this out in a couple of different ways, because what we want to do first is we want to find the highest price in closed, then we want to find the date that's associated with that. So, it implies, okay, we want to find out which row we've got in here, and then we want to find the index of that row over here too. So we're going to use a couple of functions that we've done here first. And again, since we're going to build it out in a couple of different ways, I'm going to go over here first, and remember, how do we go ahead and find the largest value in close? Well, I'm just going to click on the top here in D4. I'm going to make sure that close is named as a range. That'll make things a little bit easier. So I do Shift Command down, and I'm just going to call this close price, press enter. And now that I've got this, I can say, okay, we want to find the high close price here. So what we'll do is we'll just say equal max, and then inside here, close price. And whoops, how come that didn't show? Oh, I didn't tab over, I guess. Close price. There we go. And that's 84.56. If you take a look at where 84.56 is, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's the 7th one down, it looks like. Is that correct? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm sorry, it's the 8th one down. So now that we've got this, well, how do we figure out that we're the 8th one down? Well, remember our match function can go ahead and do that. So now I'm going to go in here. Now that I know I've got a max value in here, what I'm going to type in for match is, I'll say equal match, and then remember what the criteria is first, what do you want to look up? Well, I want to look up the value, that's max value that I just had, so that's what I pasted in there. And then what do we have afterward? Well, it's the lookup array. What is a lookup array going to be? Oh yeah, it's going to be our close price array. And then what is our match type going to be? Remember, the 0 is the exact match. When we press enter there, we get an 8. And indeed, that's what we thought we had before. Now, the last thing is, well, how do you come up with the date value here? And that's where we can do our index lookup. So remember, what an index lookup is going to do is it's going to take a look at all of the data that you've got in here. So let's go ahead and select our data. And so I'm going to click here and then shift down and then shift, whoops, and then get all of my criteria selected here. And now once I've got this all selected, what I'm going to do is go ahead and name this. So I'm just going to go ahead and name this data. And then I'm going to say over here, and this is where we'll go ahead and do our index. And remember what our index does is it takes a look at a whole reference criteria here. So a whole big selection. Imagine that as a rectangle selection like the data that we just did. And we're going to find based on a row and column that we want to look up. So I'm just going to click on FX over here. We're going to go into index. You can type in search for index here. We use the reference one in here. The reference is just the data that you're going to be looking up in here. So for our reference, I'm actually going to type in data right in here. For our row number, so again, you know, our row number is going to be going down here. How are we going to find our row number? Well, we're actually just going to go ahead and grab it from right here. So that's where our row number is going to come from. And what is our column number going to be? Well, our column number is going to be, so we could look up in this range too if we wanted to do a match with this as well. But I'll just say, okay, 1, 2, 3. We know we want to do the 3rd column over for the date. So I'll say 3 in here. And for the area number in here, we should be able to ignore that, and we press enter here, and we got 11,817. And so if we take a look, 11,817. Let's see, what's our value here? Oh, yep, that is our biggest criteria. So this is looking good as well. Okay, so what do we want to do next? We want to find the date on which the stock had the lowest volume. So we'll do something very similar over here. So let's build this in stages again. Let's see, for lowest volume. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at volume here. I'm going to highlight this, go down below. Why don't we name this? I'll just call it volume. And over here we'll say equals min, open parentheses, and that's just going to be the volume range. Whoops, equal min tab over, and then type vol, and then tab over. It accepts it, so there we go. This is giving us what our minimum volume is. Now what we want to do is we want to find the match value for our minimum volume. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut the minimum volume out in cell A9. And I'm going to type in match. So again, what does match do when we tab over? Well, first is a lookup value, which is going to be that min value that we've got. And then what is our lookup array going to be? Oh yeah, it's going to be volume. So I just tab over with volume. And then our match type is going to be 0, which is the exact match. So this goes and it finds our minimum value is in 248. And what's interesting is now what we could do is we could take the same index criteria that we had here, and I'm going to drag this down below here. So, but instead of saying index data on L9 and 3, let's see, we want to do 1, 2, 3. No, we do want to do 3 because that's where our data is in here. So when we press on enter, let's see, is our lowest volume 112516? We can look through all these different values in here. 112516. Here we go. So this is 8 million. So that's the number that I had before. But just if you're curious and you want to really make sure that that's the case. So it was 8 million and change. If I highlight this down here, remember down in the lower corner, you get your min and your max. And my min is, that's exactly right, 8,409,000. So that's perfect. So we're done now with F. And so next we have the average volume on days with an above average closing price. So we're getting a little squirrely here with average volume on days when this is the case. Now, so we only want to get an average if this is the case. So in the way that we had a count if, there's also sum if. We could do average if as well. Same sort of criteria to set that up. So we want to build that in stages here, just like we did before. If we want to find out first, what is the average closing price? What we'll do here is we'll say equals average, tab over. Then if I start to type in close, we had a name in here for close price, so I press and enter. So that's the average closing price. And so if we want to find the average volume on days, so we want to get an average if of the volume on days when we have an above average closing price. So we're going to say average if the closing price is above average, and then we're going to get the average volume when that criteria is met. So in the same way where we had a count if, you can do an average if. So our count if is going to be the range, and we want to see the range where we have the closing average is above the average closing. So let's verify in here again. It's worded really weird and it's getting really complicated in here. But the average volume on days, so average if an above average closing. So the closing price is greater than the average closing. So let's go ahead over here and enter this in. So we're going to say equals average if, and remember what average if does. So we want to take a look at a range in here. So what is the range that we're going to do? We're going to look at our closing in here, and we want to have it where we're going to look through closing, and we're going to say on days when the closing has a price that's greater than, and then that's going to be the average closing. So we type in average in here, and then closing price in here. And if that is true, then we want to go ahead and we want to get an average. But what do we want to get an average of? We want to get an average of those values. And those values are the volume values. So we'll type in our volume in here. Again, if we take a look at it, so we want to take a look in the range of closing prices. And if the closing price is greater than the average closing price, then we want to take this last value here, and that's what we want to average up. So instead of summing up, we're averaging up this value in here. So we get that third value in here. We press enter. We get 25 million in here. If you want to go ahead and try to figure that out on your own, but that is definitely the value that we've got. And in fact, we can just do this according to a dollar value here, get rid of the cents, and we've got one more, which is value H. If we take a look at average at H, so we're taking a look at, we want the average closing price on days with, okay, and then we've got two criteria here, below average volume and above average open price. So this is a case for the average ifs function, and ifs means there are a bunch of criteria. That's what the S plural is. So we're going to take a look at the range that we want to be an average in here, and then we'll take a look at the first range and criteria that we compare and the second range and criteria. We could have third, fourth, fifth. We could continue to go down, but all of them have to be true in order for it to be considered as part of the average. So if we go back over here, whoops, again to see, we want to get the average closing price. We'll go ahead that on days when comma our volume. So we're going to look at volume, and then that's going to be comma. So volume is the range, is below average. So that's less than average volume, and then comma, and then we have open price greater than above average open price. So let's go ahead and enter that in. So we're going to say equals, and it's going to be average ifs. So we'll tab over here, and we want to average ifs, and it's going to be our closing price, and it's going to be the closing price if we have a volume. So we'll grab our volume in here, and that's going to be the criteria that we're going to be using for volume is when it's below, so that's why I do quote less than quote, and then average, or ampersand, and then average. So we'll type in not average ifs, but straight up average. and that's volume in here. And then after this, what our next criteria is going to be in here, well, first we want to get the range. So the range that we're going to do is after volume is, oh man, let me see, what is that? That's open, so we're going to do open price. And what we're doing is we want above average open prices, so we do comma, quote, greater than close quotes, ampersand, and then we'll do average, not average ifs, but straight up average. And this is going to be our open price. So let's take a look again just to make sure. So we're going to average up our close price in situations where the volume matches this criteria here, where it's less than the average volume. And the other criteria is when the open price matches this criteria here, where it's greater than the open price. We'll press enter. And our formula in here is, let's go ahead and make this as a $sign. And what we should be getting right in here is a 6542. Hopefully you got that. If you got that, you got everything in the Microsoft problem. Keep at it.